I think we have critical mass. We've got about 120 colleagues on the call. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy mornings, afternoons, evenings to join this discussion. My name is Bob Hawkins. I'm our Global Lead for Technology and Innovation in Education here at the World Bank. And it's tough to believe, but this is our 11th session on frontier technologies. We started looking at the implications of blockchain, have pivoted in the last discussion to integrate the impact of AI on education. And from the World Bank's perspective, this is a fantastic community that has been built over the last number of years. Having this type of discussion with practitioners that are on the cutting edge of the use of technology, understanding both the challenges, opportunities, pitfalls of implementing new technologies to transform education for youth around the world. So again, thank you so much for joining. This discussion, we tend to make it very interactive. We have a few members of the community that will share some experiences, but we encourage all of you to join in as well and share some of your own perspectives. So if you have a question, please just raise your hand, or please use the chat to include any questions that you might have. We're also, as you can see, encouraged everybody to just introduce themselves in the chat so we get a sense of who's here from different parts of the world. So without further ado, I just want to say a word of welcome to everybody. We have three themes that we'll touch on today on how AI is impacting and could impact education, from content to virtual tutoring to assessment. And of course, all of these areas will overlap with each other. So as we kind of go through our three areas, we will be making the connections between them as well. And we, particularly from the World Bank's perspective, want to focus on what are the challenges and opportunities in developing countries. Let me allow Cris Purifoy, who is our partner in these dialogues from the Learning Economy Foundation, to introduce himself and say a few words before I pass over to my colleague Cris to do a bit of a framing for this discussion. Cris Purifoy, to you.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Cris. I won't actually say much because we always run out of time. So I'm going to give us all a little bit more time to have these discussions. But I just want to, thank everyone again. This is number 11. What an exciting journey it's been, and more to come. But as we head into the future here, it's interesting to start looking at some of these new technologies and how they intersect with credentialing, and how we can start to look towards the future of education and employment, in a little more efficient way. So exciting conversation today. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Cris. And needless to say, if you're not speaking, please go ahead and mute your microphone. Oh my gosh, I see Clyde Boyer, a blast from the past. Clyde, great to see you. We will definitely bring you in the conversation, so be ready, Clyde. So Cris, let me pass over to you, my colleague Cris, to go ahead and introduce yourself and provide us a little bit of framing for this discussion today. Cris, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you to the other Cris, the good Cris, and to Bob for the opening, and to everybody for making the time. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I'll try to address a super short overview of some of the discussions that we're seeing are taking place in terms of policy, just to hopefully to help in the framing and to bring some provocation that I hope will trigger the interesting discussions. We really aim that this today activity will be not one more AI event, but something that we can gather information from all the different implementations. So let's give it a go. Do we see the screen, right, Bob? Can you give me a thumb up? Fantastic. Great. So probably many of you are aware that 2 weeks ago, took place an incredibly interesting and relevant summit in London with a number of decision makers from industrialized countries and very, very selective participation of CEOs from AI industry, which I think is very good news. I will really look forward to have more of these things. But at the same time, if you have a closer look of the participants, many of them were clear representative of the global north, which is understandable. These are the first discussions. But at the same time, if we have a closer look at some of the implications that this technology is making in other regions, I think it's going to be a good idea to bring other perspectives. Some of you might be well aware that some of the AI companies are producing some tensions in countries where low-paid workers are labeling the data from the AI, or countries like my home country in Chile, when Google wanted to implement a data center that produced a lot of strikes from the neighbors who were really concerned about the amount of water that these systems were going to consume. So I think these discussions will be very important to diversify and bring different voices. Just to give you a reference, Microsoft last year declared 1.7 billion gallons of water just to keep the AI systems code. Now, I don't need to provide definitions to this community, but I think it's important from the policy perspective to not forget that AI is a multi-purpose technology, meaning it requires a set of skills. And from the policy perspective, we have to tackle several targets at the same time. Probably the executive order from the White House in the US is a good example of that. The second thing is LLMs. Despite that they might be large, that doesn't mean that they are diverse. So we have to carefully think in the months to come how we ensure that this data that has been training these systems are not only massive in terms of volume, but also diverse. And the third thing is GenAI, although fascinating, it produces mimic of human knowledge or human creativity. I think the word mimic here is essential, and what we have to carefully think is how we develop capacities among teachers and students to understand when these things are coming from systems or from people, and help them to navigate that. Another distinction is learning from AI, which is what we do when we were using Duolingo or many of the tools that will be discussed today. Learning about AI, which is developing a fluency in a much more broader spectrum for every citizen that will be affected or benefit from some way of using these systems, and learning with AI. For instance, when we enhance the role of the teacher, providing key data to understand how students are learning, or providing warning alarms when early actions. Talking about teachers, I think it's important also to separate when the AI systems are being used in the classroom to enhance the role of the teacher, and when there's no supervision, meaning when the students are using these systems in other contexts without adult supervision. So the guidance will be particularly different, I would say. The second element that I think is relevant is in some countries, for instance, in the UK, they're taking place interesting discussions, for instance, in who is going to regulate this thing. Should be a national agency that today exists to oversee AI in education, or should we create a new one? Whatever the track is adopted, expertise will be a critical factor here, and consolidate skills that might need to be developed. The second thing is, although AI has the potential to transform education, and we see very promising trends in that regard, at the same time, there are various scenarios that we have to consider. For instance, automating poor teaching, which is something that already we have seen in other kind of tools. So it's something to consider. And the third one, which I guess this meeting is a fantastic example, is a global outlook of a different country perspective, but also keeping in mind that so far the global south is very, very underrepresented. Now, just to give you an example in terms of how these systems can help us to navigate with computer vision, in the example number one, we see how incredible is the capacity of these systems to read images, with a lot of potential for kids with disability, teaching languages and learning how to explore different formats of information representation. Number two, we can see here in this example how incredibly accelerated has been the evolution of these systems. Here you can have a comparison between Midjourney 1.5 years ago and now, and the differences are stunning. And the third thing is, let's not forget that these systems can inherit some level of bias. This is another example, asking for a biochemistry professor at the UK university, and the system brings males and white. And these are the sort of things that we will need to consolidate, evolve, diversify, and make more flexible. Now, there are a number of challenges that I think are essential, and a lot of discussion are taking place in this area. How can we help users and developers to mitigate some of the most accurate challenges, while at the same time we have clarity on the potentials? I mean, the opportunities for personalization and effective feedback are all over the place, but we need better evidence to provide guidance. How to boost efficiency and creativity, I think, is something that we are seeing already emerging results from the academic world, but there's a lot to shed light here. And in terms of challenges, I would say, given this risky in terms of manipulation, misinformation, and cheating, let's say. Better AI fluency will be required at the teacher's level, at the institution's level, to learn how to navigate the challenges in terms of plagiarism or misinformation, but also what are the standards that we need to embrace to be sure that these systems are trained with data that is representative of different communities and different cultures, and what are the tools that we have to bring to reduce the risk of impartial representation. And at the same time, in the same direction, there's a lot of work to do in terms of how to make this system more explainable, how to facilitate an audit of these outputs that can help us to take better decisions and to understand what could be the risk, for instance, in terms of privacy and what additional actions need to be taken, understanding that the tools we have so far might not be useful enough to address new challenges. And two side effects that I think are very important to keep into account. One is the massive carbon footprint of these systems that could have when we train these algorithms. And number two, what are the activities in the world of education and in other sectors that can be automated? What does it mean in terms of displacement, or how can we better prepare people to work with these systems as professionals in the years to come? So let me finish with 4 ideas that I think can be helpful for the discussion. The first one is we need to move fast, but don't break things, meaning the technology is changing massively. The technology by November 2024 is going to outpace massively the technology that we have today. So that means that the accelerated change make that the expertise is very scarce. I mean, this summit today might not be the case, but expertise is very, very limited today. And at the same time, let's face that the pace of change is uneven, highly concentrated, and to some extent unpredictable. So keeping these discussions taking place is fundamental. Second thing is, we have to keep into account that this thing can create new digital divides and consolidate the ones that exist. So that means to keep an eye on how the global North discussion can be enriched by the other perspective. And at the same time, those who have been working in digital divide to some extent, we know that we have to address different stages, right? Access, use, what does it mean in terms of data sovereignty? And how can we foster to move new proficiencies and new adoption of these tools? From the regulatory perspective and the education institutions, is critical to provide guidance for those who might not be expert and offer AI safe zones, which I think is fundamental today in a moment that everything is moving very fast. So we learned in 2023 in terms of the education sector that it's not a good idea to ban these technologies because at the end of the day, things might deviate in other directions. Number two, one of the most fundamental components from the education perspective is these tools can really provide a new relationship with knowledge where we can select where we want to put the cognitive engagement and what are the things that we want to automate or displace easily. I think that's fundamental for education. And in the same direction, AI literacy will mean to balance opportunities and challenges. And with a big concern that we have today is that many of the teachers and faculties are not prepared to navigate these challenges. And what we have observed in the last months is many institutions are either creating new frameworks for navigating this educational technology or adopting ones. Whatever the approach you have, I think that's a very good idea to educate and provide guidance to those who might have less information. And finally, before concluding, I think from the AI governance, there are a lot of discussions today that I think is good to have in the radar. Number one is one of the main changes in terms of paradigm between the social media time and now is today the industry is seeking for guidance from regulators, right? And that in many cases is a result of long consultations with not only expert communities, but with those who are users in Australia and Japan, in the US and in the UK. This has been the result, and I'm sure this is going to be happening in more countries as well. The second element is how to regulate this thing. There are recommendations to go in different layers, industry standards, national regulation, and international coordination. There's a lot to be done here because there is a lot of blind spot that we need to clarify. And at the same time, what is the best institutional design that we need to embrace this? It has to be an AI education agency, has to be a super agency that we can connect expertise from different institutions, or we have to create something completely decentralized. I don't think there's today a perfect approach, but this is something to embrace. And finally, before concluding, I guess to avoid falling into the utopian or dystopian approach, I think it's a good idea to separate the short-term impacts and the long-term ones, both the positive and the negatives, and then we will be in a much better shape to build roadmaps for the future. Let me stop here. Back to you, Bob.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. So that gives us a lot to think about and helps kind of frame the discussion we want to have. I mean, from the World Bank's perspective, most of our clients are struggling with how to think about both the implementation as well as the policies around AI. And what we want to do with this discussion is to begin to introduce some of the concrete examples that are being developed to inform how we might want to think about both scaling these applications, using them to transform the way teaching and learning is done, as well as to inform policy. So I'm happy to kind of introduce our first speaker, Jamie Alexandre from Learning Equality. We kind of started this discussion about a year ago, or more than a year ago, when Midjourney just came out, and Jamie was looking at its impact on content, developed, I think it was called Fable Diffusion or Fable, I forget the name of it, was a storytelling application that used Midjourney to help create children's books. That was fascinating. In our discussion in the spring, we also shared with you some work that we did in Colombia. I see a number of our colleagues from Colombia online as well, thinking about how AI could democratize digital content creation and storytelling. And we had a fantastic experience that we shared in September that has now actually been implemented in Colombia through the Evoke project. So Jamie, let me pass the floor to you just to kind of introduce yourself and to maybe touch on this issue of how you're looking at AI to automate the work of integrating open educational resources with curricular frameworks, as well as maybe touch on some of the issues that Chris raised around how we should think about equity in some of the countries you're working in. Jamie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Bob, and thanks everyone for having me here today. Fantastic group, lots of familiar faces, great to be together. So yeah, I mean, for us, equity has always been at the center of the work that Learning Equality does. 10 years ago, when we started creating education technology, we were very focused on the digital divide. You know, I came from this background working at Khan Academy and seeing all of the great potential of online education technology, but realizing that it was leaving out the 2/3 of the world that didn't have internet access. And so the big problem that we were working to address in those early days was how can we bring OER, open educational resources, that live in this online space and all of the surrounding pedagogy and tools and support and models, and make sure that we can be inclusive of all of those communities that are being left out. And we knew at the time, you know, there's always going to be, we're always leapfrogging. There's always these new innovations that are going to be coming out that continue to further advantage those who have the most connectivity, the most access, the most preparedness to engage and benefit from those technologies. And so this is now another kind of cycle of that, where we're seeing all of these incredible technologies that are going to transform both how we learn, how we create, how we work. But at the same time, you know, there's this differential access, both in terms of still connectivity, still 1/3 of the world not on the internet. And so by definition, not able to benefit from these large language models that can't run offline on local devices, as well as all of the preparedness, just fundamental digital literacy, as well as the nuances of understanding how to effectively leverage these new technologies. So that's been a big part of how we think about integrating AI into our work, is how can we ensure that the same way we're bringing these open educational resources and supportive pedagogy tools to offline communities, how can we leverage these AI tools to make sure that we're benefiting everyone more equitably? So one of the, you know, even though we focus on offline, one of the key pieces of our ecosystem is an online repository of open educational resources, where we've aggregated 200,000 OER across many different languages and have a platform to support curriculum alignment, where content can be drawn from those many different sources and organized to create these custom bundles of content that can be published and loaded into offline devices and used for teaching and learning. So that's, you know, the process of curriculum alignment, of bringing in the curricular structures from a country, a target kind of taxonomy and organizational structure and metadata, and then finding the most relevant resources from this huge pool of content and slotting them into that taxonomy is a huge amount of work and requires particular expertise. And so one thing we've been working on for several years now, through a lot of workshops and hackathons and design sprints, is thinking about which parts of that process of aligning content to curricular standards can be supported through automation. And this is human-in-the-loop automation. It's not replacing that human workflow. It's really streamlining and reducing the amount of brute force labor that's required. So there are two key pieces that we've made some really good progress on. One is the digitization of those curricular standards to start with. You start with these documents, often only available in print, that have a lot of map out the learning objectives and the structures, the scope and sequence for the curriculum. But it's an incredible amount of work to then digitize those into a machine-readable format that can be directly used within an education platform and used for the process of curriculum alignment. And so we're now using GPT-4 along with OCR and some other kind of pieces in a tool chain to automatically extract curricular standards into a taxonomy from source documents like that. And there's a fun animation of this, so I'm just sharing a link to the blog post in the chat here. So then once you have that structure, the obvious next piece is how do you find the relevant pieces of content and align them into that structure. So that's where we ran a Kaggle competition earlier this year with a recommender model that can basically take different pieces of content and slot them into different places, match them against the curricular learning objectives, and slot them into this structure so that you can quickly come up with a draft channel of aligned content that can then be reviewed by an expert, tweaked and adapted, and then published and used offline. So it's one way of, it's not putting a chatbot directly in front of people offline, but it's leveraging the power of these tools to streamline the process of getting the most relevant content into their hands so that they can seamlessly use that for both teaching and learning. So I think that's one key way we're thinking about equity. We're also thinking about, because we do within our Calibri platform have asynchronous data synchronization mechanisms, where you can have data where there's occasional connectivity, or when two devices connect peer-to-peer, even totally offline, data can sync from one device to the next. So we're looking at how we can have free-form response answers provided by students be synchronized on an occasional basis to an online server, have the auto-grading, auto-feedback through a large language model happen there, and then sync the results back into the classroom and to the student's device. So that's another way that we're trying to leverage the existing bridging infrastructure that we've built to tap into some of the benefits of these tools.
So Jamie, one question there. I mean, so this is a huge challenge with OERs is the curation. There's just so much content. How do you identify what is the best content? I wonder if you can comment on if this process has helped to bring the best content to the surface, however that might be defined, as well as this challenge of how do you link specific content to the development of specific skills. And whether kind of that matching has been accurately done. And we will get into some of the assessment pieces later on. So also, if there's anything you want to say about assessment.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say best in a global, like in an objective sense. I think it's really about relevance and context relevance. So it does a fantastic job of finding the most relevant pieces for a particular objective within a curricular standard. So, what's best is obviously very, very context dependent. There's kind of a few parts in the chain of making that happen. One is, and we're working with several partners now to pilot this. One is just initial kind of high level topical matching, like this is teaching adding fractions, for instance. So we find all the videos and exercises that are teaching people to add fractions. That's kind of using a standard, not using a large language model, but just using a standard embedding model that's been fine-tuned through the data set because we have this huge data set of hundreds of thousands of linkages between particular pieces of content and particular objectives or places within a taxonomy. So we use that as the training data set to fine-tune a language model that allowed us to predict when a piece of content is going to be relevant to a specific learning objective within a curricular topic tree. So that part, we got fantastic results from that Kaggle competition. We're continuing to build out that data set and building kind of a virtuous cycle where as more curriculum alignment happens, we get more and more data sets that can be used to further refine. But then there's kind of a post-processing stage that we're now starting to experiment with where Once you get that list of candidate content, you can actually then ask the large language model to do explicit matching of relevance and vetting and reviewing of how, like, which specific objectives within that place in the curriculum that piece of content helps to address, and where within that piece of content is it actually teaching that, so you can do deep linking into the most relevant place. But I think one key thing around this approach versus kind of generating new content from scratch is that it helps to bypass some of the concerns around bias generation, around misinformation, about hallucination that these models have, because this is content that has been pre-vetted and is deemed to be, you know, high quality pedagogically and for use across a variety of contexts. So there's fewer risks of, you know, we're selecting, we're filtering rather than generating potentially risky content from scratch. But I think there's a middle ground as well that I know a lot of folks here are probably already involved with in various ways, of retrieval augmented generation, where you're generating, but it's like an open book exam rather than just relying on the things that the models have memorized. You have a corpus of text and documents and content that it can draw from. When somebody asks a question or states what they're trying to learn, it can search across that set of content, find the relevant pieces, and feed that in as context to the ongoing conversation. So then it really grounds the conversation and the knowledge that's being presented by the model in the content and the knowledge, the truth, the ground truth provided by that content. So it can be generative, adaptive, and responsive to the flow of dialogue, but grounded in the reality of that pre-vetted content. That's one way to avoid some of those risks.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, please do include any links to this work into the chat. And for others working on similar initiatives, please reach out to Jamie or respond in the chat. Also, if you want to jump in at any point, just go ahead and raise your hand. We're also trying to follow the chat. But I want to bring Paul Atherton into the conversation now, who's also been kind of looking at how AI is impacting content generation from Fab Inc. Paul, I wonder if you can just share a little bit with us about your work on AI for Ed, as well as some of the kind of the use cases that you see emerging on content development, as well as some of the lessons learned. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm Paul Atherton from Fab Inc., although I wanted to speak to people today a bit on a piece of work we're doing with the Gates Foundation alongside Better Purpose and Team for Tech, which we're calling AIforeducation.org. Please feel free to look at the website. Anyone that spots spelling mistakes, please send them back, because it's very much a work in progress. I should say I had a lot of questions for Jamie, because I think, Jamie, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of some of the challenges. And I think that if we step back a little bit, half of the advantages I see for AI is actually just forcing us to use the kind of content and the existing materials in a smarter way. So it is this digitalization, and how do we do information processing and information retrieval, which is really going to make or break the use of large language models in content generation. And the reason why I say that is because of the issues we know about bias and alignment issues from the core models, because they're trained on the internet, and the internet is dominated by people in the US, people in Europe. It's not dominated by educationalists from Sierra Leone, which is where we work. So Jamie, we should definitely carry on chatting. I'm very excited about what you're trying to do. Just for what we were trying to do, or what we have been doing, we've been working with AI, traditional AI, if you will, so predictive machine learning techniques for dropout of girls during COVID, and then some stuff in terms of CPD using large language models. We've been piloting these in Sierra Leone for the last year, and we've learned a lot in terms of WhatsApp chatbots and how do we get the right content in terms of CPD to teachers as well. But one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to people today is when we were doing this, we saw a lot of challenges kind of emerging, which were shared a lot across a lot of organizations. So it is this information retrieval, it is the alignment and the bias as well. So in collaboration with the Gates Foundation, we set up the AI for Education initiative to try and essentially crowdsource ideas and provide a home and a platform for people to share those ideas, and also crucially share the code as well. So we've open sourced some of our code for parsing documents, for summarizing chatbot conversations as well. So just to give a bit of a plug for that. On the content generation, I see it as a great co-pilot. So I was asked the other day, challenge AI in education is a solution looking for a problem, and I think that's right. Because it's so new, but I don't see anything wrong with that as long as we do it in a sensible way and make sure that we're not selling snake oil. But one of the ways I see this going ahead is this co-pilot for the high intensity, high cost activities such as content generation. And I see this in two ways. One is the system-wide support. So it's providing the content, be it lesson plans or be it other things, which goes in to help the teacher. And I can talk through some innovations there. We're talking to an organization, Robots Mali, who were doing this in Mali, surprisingly enough, in local languages. They had some key lessons. And the second space, I think, is using some of the vision models and some of the voice models to do adaptive real-time content generation. So this is a lot more of the kind of chatbots and generating things on the fly. And we're exploring some of these vision models like Lava to do this in the real world. Just coming back to the first stage, as I say, I'm seeing a lot of people who are saying, oh, can we do AI to do lesson plans? And the answer is yes, of course you can. The risk with generative AI is developing content is easy. Developing well-structured, well-thought-out online content is very difficult. One of the key things we heard from Robots Mali, which has stuck with me, is they wanted to do it in local languages. And they actually learned that GPT-4, while it was great at the prompt engineering and doing the content in English, was not very good in local languages. And it was better to have a two-stage process. So generate the content in English and then translate, and then check your translations. And it sounds super simple, but to me, that's just a lesson which we should be sharing, because there's many people we're chatting to in Tanzania, in Zambia, who are saying, how do we get this in our local language? And the answer might be, you do a two-step. So I think there's a lot of stuff, interesting things going on there, which is good to be aware of. As I say, the second one is on this adaptive content. And I think if we can get this right and we reduce the cost of, say, marking and adaptation to close to zero, it will be, very exciting. And here I think it's the vision models and the OCR, the optimal character recognition, which means that, it is possible to take a photo of a textbook and get the content made easier or harder or adapted to the local circumstances. So we're exploring this as we speak. We're hoping to fine-tune a model, and, we'll hopefully speak to you again on some of the successes or otherwise. But I think a final point, and then I'll stop, is, one of the challenges is how do we do this adaptation? And I think this completely depends on the task at hand. So we do have to be really specific about the task which we're doing or the teacher's doing or the child's doing in order to get a good model. That's one of the things we've learned over the last year. You have to optimize for a specific task. And then once you're in that space, there's a few opportunities. You can prompt engineering is actually good enough for a lot of things, although GPT-4 is expensive, and we can discuss that. For others, you do need fine-tuning. Fine-tuning means you need lots of information. And again, this increases the costs as well. So when you start going into the fine-tuning space or the building model space, I think this is something which we're actually better doing as a community, which is, again, coming back why we set up the kind of community approach. Let me stop there, Bob. I don't know if you've got any questions or...
No, these are fantastic points. And I want to touch on this point of the information disparity that exists right now in AI models, particularly in local language, in in local cultural contexts. And the idea that you just brought up are there opportunities to kind of aggregate data across countries, or would you work on a country by country level? Maybe a question quickly for you, Paul, and maybe Jamie, you have some experience also in Uganda, and then we'll move on to the next set of issues around virtual tutoring, which touches on these issues as well. But Paul.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. As I say, for the local languages, I am coming back to, like, because whenever you fine tune a model, and Jamie probably knows this, you can get it right, but then it goes wrong in other ways. It's a lot of work. So you can get really good at one task, it forgets the rest. I actually think that we've had a lot of translation success over the last 20 years. So why not do it in a two-step process for languages, you know? And the only argument there is latency. So if you are doing a real-time chatbot and it's taking half an hour, it's probably not good enough. But for offline first stuff, I actually think let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because it can do it doesn't mean it should do it or it's the best tool for the job. In terms of the specific to generalizable, I think there's some things where the answer will be yes, and some things where we'll have to train for specific context. Lesson plans is something where we're working on. How do you pass lesson plans? Because it's a nightmare. We're hoping there to get something generalizable. But what we're really hoping for is that there's then a feedback loop where people realize that if you just use this structure, it makes life a lot easier in the future. So I think it's going to be a balance that will be task dependent to not fully answer your question, Bob.
Jamie, you can also try to not fully answer my question if you wish.
Sounds good. No, yeah, really appreciated, Paul, your everything you shared. And yeah, the language scarcity and imbalance, that's something we've seen in the open education resource space. It's something we see in obviously just online general data sets. The translation approach is a very interesting one. We saw some people doing that for data augmentation for the Kaggle competition as well, where you have this large data set across many different languages, but then some of those languages are less represented. You can actually translate and create kind of a supplemental data set where you translate across every language pair and have a broader training base. The translate first, then do generation in English and then translate into target language seems like a good short-term workaround. The main concern would be additional biases that come in terms of concepts and structures that aren't well represented or represented differently in English rather than kind of working directly within a target language. There may be nuance that kind of and bias, like Western bias, that's introduced through that two-stage process. But obviously we have this huge scarcity of good training data for so many languages. So I think that needs to be a key priority, is building out the data sets in the long tail of underrepresented mother tongue languages. So I think that's a great thing for everyone to come together on. And one, to your question, Bob, of whether we focus on one country, another country, train specific models, there's good evidence that training models across like other languages helps support their performance. And it's the same as with humans, you know, multilinguals have, you know, additional language skills in each of their languages that somebody that's monolingual might not. So similarly with these models, there's transfer of knowledge across languages. And so training a model on as many languages as possible will build a more robust and generalizable model, because there's transfer and kind of interconnectedness that it can leverage within those data sets. So yeah, building out bigger data sets, underrepresented languages, and yeah, fine-tuning on those models.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Paul. I want to kind of make the link now to, you know, what has emerged in the last week with the latest announcement from OpenAI around agents and specialized GPTs, and reintroduce Cris Purifoy and LEF to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing, thinking about how agents, virtual tutors, can help students with specific tasks, how those tasks can be recognized through credentials, and ultimately the holy grail of all of this in many cases is making those credentials valuable enough to get a job and job placement. So Cris, over to you to share a little bit about your work on this value chain.
Yeah, thanks. I think that we find ourselves at a really interesting place, right? There's a lot of fascination about AI. There's also a lot of trepidation. And, the way we think about this, I think that it's in multiple parts. We recently, some of you may have heard of LearnCard, which is our digital wallet, kind of an open source package for storing credentials and learning and employment records. Recently, in partnership with Brighthive and Dextera, we launched what's called LearnCloud, which expands that a little further and connects it to 250 different existing data sources. So the idea here is extensibility, everything from connecting with Indeed and, National Labor Exchange to all the different learning and management systems and, student information systems like, Canvas and Blackboard and beyond. And the idea here is how do we deploy AI responsibly that adds a lot of value to learners, but doesn't, exploit them? It doesn't move them into an ecosystem where, things are not as responsible as they have been. And so for us, we think about it like this. Number one, it's through consent, right? As we start to think about how AIs can add value to individual learners and employees and people across the whole, a value chain of education and employment. So first it's about having them have their learning and employment records at the root of that, and using their LERs to train the AI. Okay, so this is a bit of a different approach. Instead of just relying on generalized data, the idea here is that each individual needs to have a personalized experience, and and through the ability to connect to all their different various streams, whether it's in an employment space, and bringing something down from Workday or Gusto or something like that, or whether it's in the education space and bringing something down from Canvas or Blackboard, and then allowing them to sync their learning and employment records with a bit of consent, so they understand how their data is being used, and they can have a transparent use of that. Inside of LearnCloud, we have what's called a data vault, if you will, but it functions a lot like the health app inside of your iPhone, where you can see all the different connections that are being made. But it's even more transparent because it gives you kind of an understanding of exactly who can read and write and how that works. And then from there, it's about using their LER to train that AI to do a variety of things, right? I mean, obviously we've talked about content generation. There's all sorts of great things you can do in terms of chatbots that can help you learn. But in addition to that, now it's about mapping pathways to goals, right? And when you start to bring in data sources like Indeed and jobs data and skills data from Lightcast and things like this, you can start to get a really robust understanding of how to actually navigate into the future that you want, right? And so in a lot of ways, the idea here is, as me as a learner, I need to be able to, sit down, train my AI with my learning and employment records, consent to how this is being used and kind of have a personal access to that AI. And then that AI can help me understand, what are the prerequisites to getting a job, that I want, or what are the direct pathways and things that I can do right away to start to work towards those goals. And then it can directly match you with that, right? So we're talking about bringing in the jobs, and actually credentialing along the way so that I can match directly with employers and with jobs where talent and opportunities can kind of equalize. And so this is a lot of how we think about this. I know that, you talk about AI agents. I think this is an important aspect of this. When we start to understand AI as more than just two-dimensional, it's not just, a given, a call and repeat, but it's actually something that is learning from me, it's growing, and it actually becomes mine, right? This is where it becomes interesting, right? Because every learner, as we know, is not, they're not all the same. It's incredibly diverse, the way people, the way they think, the way they learn, what they know, what they want to do in the world. And so all of this data deployed in responsible ways with consent baked around that, connected to an individual's own records, allows for them to really get a rich, dynamic, personalized experience that can help them really track directly to their goals. And this is, it's been a bit of a holy grail in our industry as we have worked towards what we used to call an internet of education, but now what we roughly just call learning and employment records. But we've arrived at that moment. So it's a really exciting time now where we can start to look towards how do we create these wraparound services that use really powerful AI models, regardless, of where they come from. OpenAI or Google or Meta, they all are going to compete. And at the end of the day, we like to think of them more as commodities. The best ones will continue to win and switch in and out. And at the end of the day, what we really want is continuity of my individual experience with AI that comes from my learning and employment records, right? So having self-sovereign ownership of my records and having a place where I can centralize those for myself and have consent around how those are used allows for my experience with AI to be seamless regardless of where I find that. And again, we like to think about that as as coaching services, right? As learning services and matching services, and each of those have their place in trying to map a lifelong learning journey that is successful. That's kind of how we're thinking about it.
Thanks, Chris. So, when we just started these discussions, we focused first on the blockchain and the opportunities for decentralization of data ownership. These discussions we're having on AI are going the other direction with increasing centralization of data. And throughout technology, we see this pull and tug on decentralization and centralization. And this is also, Jamie, something we've talked about in terms of interoperability of platforms and solutions. How do you see this kind of playing out? And this is a question for Chris, but Jamie, Paul, please jump in as well with regard to data centralization versus opportunities for data ownership and decentralization, as well as this opportunity for greater interoperability amongst solutions and platforms. I don't know who wants to take a first cut.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick and then I'll let the others join. I would say that, this is right at the root of what I'm trying to express, which is an individual, at least through our system, through LearnCloud and through LearnCard, they have a digital wallet where they own their own records, right? This is scaled. We've kind of solved that part of the chain. And they essentially have a decentralized identifier, a DID, that is connected just to them. It allows for them to own their records. It uses verifiable credentials and instead of blockchain, which is now standards-based with W3C, which allows for those records to be verified even offline. So it's really great for equity. But at the end of the day, the idea here is taking all those records which they own and allowing those to be kind of the library, the brain, if you will, underneath their own AI. And in many ways, I think this, it gives you that continuity, right? Because the idea here is, while it is becoming increasingly centralized with AI, we can still allow for the individuals to own their own records, to be at the center of that data, to have kind of a track and an understanding, an index, if you will, of how that data is being used, and have total control over that data and that information in a way that allows for them to have a personalized experience, which is much more rich. It's much more dynamic than just a generalized experience, and also at least maintain as much control as possible, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we call this consent flow, but we think that it's incredibly important that AIs are trained with consent of the data, and this is really where we sit at the center of that.
Thanks, Chris. Before I want to go to John next, but before getting to you, John, on some experience with assessment of hard to measure skills, Jamie, any quick thoughts on how countries might want to think about interoperability, both from a technical, practical perspective as well as a policy perspective? Jamie.
Yeah, so with Calibri, for instance, being offline first, the data is federated kind of by default, where data is first, it lives within the platform where it's installed, whether that's offline or in somebody's own infrastructure. And then it's opt-in to be able to sync that data to central repositories to share with others. It's kind of, there's decisions that can be made by the owners of that data at every stage in that pipeline. So I think that form of data ownership, like Chris was emphasizing, is really important. But then obviously for us to train up models, we need to bring data together. We can do federated training, but there's limits on what that can accomplish. So I think anonymization, sharing anonymized data sets, because in general, it's not that we need personal identification for training any of these models. We may need some sort of pseudonymous identifier. So I think thinking about pipelines for transforming data into standard formats in central repositories, anonymized, And actually, some of these large language models can be very good at extracting data from different formats, different structures into standardized schemas. And so there's some interesting role for it to play in those pipelines as well. But I think also like a big piece of the part that we were talking about here is around content interoperability and portability. So one of the methods that we're looking at for interoperability there is, we have this Calibri Studio platform where we do curriculum alignment. We're building these models and these tools and all of the support systems and aggregated this library of portable offlineable content. Being able to have that support a workflow for curriculum alignment and sourcing of content, and then publishing that for use across any educational platform. So we're exploring what different output formats and interoperability would look like there, including with some of the folks on the call here today, to be able to leverage those investments so that content can flow, anonymized user data can flow, and we can really benefit from shared data sets rather than these silos.
Thanks, Jamie. There are a number of questions again that are coming from the chat. Please, we'll come back to you. Questions around IP ownership with AI, questions around ethics, questions around the role of training students and curriculum. Teaching and learning from Juan Pablo. So we'll come back to these. But John, I want you to share a little bit about kind of how we're beginning to experiment with the issue of using AI for assessment. And we started this discussion a number of years ago as clients were increasingly asking the World Bank about how to prepare youth for an uncertain future and the importance of 21st century skills, and the fact that many universities, education institutions, were not teaching these skills. They were very difficult to integrate into curriculum. They're very difficult to define what is creativity, what is collaboration, and more importantly, it was very difficult to assess. Brookings, a guy named Alvin Vista, did some studies a while back on collaborative problem solving, in which actually AI at the time was just as effective as human assessment. And in these discussions we've had, some of the interesting findings have been that really data has been the key to understanding these skills. Many of the organizations are actually using game mechanics as a way to collect more data to feed into their own proprietary algorithms. I think now with OpenAI and other AI tools, there is a real possibility to save time on doing these types of assessments that are very difficult, as well as potentially doing them as accurately as humans. So, John, maybe over to you to share a little bit about the experiment that you ran looking at using the tools to assess hard-to-measure skills. John.
Yeah, well, thanks. No, this has been a lot of fun because it's really a practical exploration of the question of, can we use AI to provide quality feedback to students, especially in low resource situations where access to teachers and mentors are really scarce? So we turned to Evoke on this, and I know Evoke has been a topic of previous conversations of this group, but for those who are catching up, it's an educational experience created by the EdTech team at the World Bank. And it uses project-based learning, game mechanics, uses storytelling to engage youth to solve global grand challenges, developing these 21st century skills. Now, the thing is that these 21st century skills are really hard to measure, at least prima facie. And so Evoke is run as campaigns, and in the most common format these days, youth work as agents through missions and use Moodle, the Moodle learning management system, as a platform, and they're guided by human mentors. So some of the skills that they work on, it varies by campaign, but it often centers around complex problem solving, critical thinking. We got collaboration, communication, and other skills are defined by each campaign. And these are very hard for mentors to evaluate, especially since that mentors are coming in as oftentimes as volunteers, or they've got limited experience working these things. And so for the submitted work they receive, it takes a lot of cognitive effort to provide this sort of personalized feedback. So the question was, can we use an LLM to provide feedback or otherwise help us measure these hard to measure skills, right? Or how can we use AI to take some of the cognitive workload off of mentors' plates? And that was really an action research question. So we created a proof of concept using ChatGPT's API set. So it's AI-driven formative feedback to student work using portfolios are submitted by these student agents on our Moodle platform. And I'll post a link to our source code as soon as I'm done here. We built it on PHP, which is not what everybody is using to explore AI tools, but we built it to be compatible with Moodle. So we have an option for further integration in the future. And the key to this is that we set variables that define the assignment, evaluation criteria, and rubrics, like which soft skills or competencies are being measured. And we also define the target audience of the feedback and the persona of the bot. And Jamie talked a bit about prompt engineering. And this is really about defining very clearly a system role where we gave the bot a persona. And in our experience, that made a huge difference on things. In this case, it's Alchemy's a mysterious leader who's called upon by youth to help solve global grand challenges. And that grounds the AI into the reality of this evoked world and made a difference in providing higher quality outputs. There's assistant piece, making sure the assistant knows its role in responding to portfolio posts for a defined audience. And then the user then shares assignment through the API with as much detail as we can about the assignment to be evaluated. And this is actually super critical because otherwise the AI runs a chance of deviating from its core task. And then we direct the AI to provide feedback on the assignment. And so we did this through API calls, talking to Moodle, pulling in data, and then posting through ChatGPT, and then posting back into Moodle. And the results have been very promising in both the GPT 3.5 and the 4 model. The tool identified where students' responses met objectives that we had in the assignment, and it provided actually really good positive feedback. And including where student responses were insufficient or inappropriate. And we found that the results were generally on par with what we'd expect from a human mentor. But of course, there are limitations. I appreciate that Cristóbal mentioned quite a few of these. But I think that it especially related to our assignment, because we have much more of a global audience. Right now, everything needs to be text-based for the analysis to really work, and it has to be in English because English at the moment is supported best. And another issue that comes up is that the tool can get very expensive if we scale it up massively, right? So the cost to use the tool at scale could potentially displace human teachers if we have to choose between using AI or teachers. And that's, of course, not our goal, right? It's intended to be assistive to take off some of that cognitive workload. But as Cristóbal hinted, accelerating technological change is likely to solve many of this stuff. But here's the real kicker of all this, okay? At the end of our experiment, by the time we cleaned everything up, we placed a generous amount of code notation, debug traps, and spacing. It took only 138 lines of code to mediate this data analysis in Moodle. So ChatGPT or using these tools can really help novice coders and educators build tools just like this with ease. So I think that when we're looking towards the future and really taking into consideration what we learned, there are several case uses. Of course, we've got Evoke, right? We've got working specifically on these hard to measure skills. But I think that more broadly, working within Moodle and other learning management systems, integrating this more fluidly as a feature baked in the platform would not take so much hard work. And when we're looking at these things from an international development perspective, I think that the ability to provide feedback to students regarding these hard to measure skills may also be valuable in situations where access to a teacher is just simply not viable. Especially in the secondary level where responses are longer and much more text-based. We've got our out-of-school children who have at least some sort of access to digital technology, perhaps, such as maybe working with an LMS remotely, or even using like WhatsApp as a communication tool. And also with refugees, maybe who have had some sort of access to technologies, but not necessarily regular access to teachers or quality access to teachers. So really just to wrap up here, this proof of concept of the Voc platform just shows how a modest amount of code can really significantly extend educational supports, particularly in under-resourced settings. So we're developing this further, and we're going to do planning on a collaboration with the city of Buenos Aires to expand a version for use in their English language classes real soon too. And
thanks, John. No,
Yeah.
a few really interesting connections there. One is kind of extending an existing platform, which Mila, I'll bring you into the conversation here to kind of share a bit of your experience on that. And again, this links also, Jamie, to our prior conversation, as well as kind of the issues that Cris raised around credentials and the skills that back up those credentials and the assessment of those skills, and whether AI can help supercharge this, particularly, again, these very hard to measure skills that in previous iterations have been detached from the learning itself, have been done through self-assessment. And again, with technology, you have the opportunity to integrate into the learning and be able to provide not just iterative feedback, but also much more rapid feedback to the students. So Mila, I want to introduce you and the work that ProFuturo is doing on this nexus between kind of your evolution and lessons learned from an online platform to looking at AI, some of the offline challenges that we talked about. I wonder if you can share a little bit about your journey and some of the kind of the challenges and successes that and lessons learned that you've experienced. Mila?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some colleagues here. Thank you for the World Bank to the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Always learning a lot from all of you. I have some things that I wrote. I will read because my English is not so good as yours. And I have some points that I don't want to lose. I will not talk about ProFuturo. I think most of you know about us. If you doesn't know, I put on the chat a link to the ProFuturo, a link to the Maps platform. So let's go to the focus points that I want to share with you. Some years ago, exactly 6 years, we decided in ProFuturo to increase our portfolio of educative tools, looking for something to help the learning of maths with advanced technology to personalize the process. It was 2018. AI was not what it is today. It was like a concept, like something that maybe one day it will come, but it's not. It was another context. 6 years is like a century in this material. And in this year, we launched a concourse to find a tool on the market. We decided not to build a tool, not to create a tool, but to look for a tool that it was already done, that it was already proven, that that had evidence, that it works, helping to learn the maths. And what we learned, the first learn that we had on this step is that in this concourse, it was not so easy and simple to find a company, a tool that you was that want to work with us, because the tool that we are looking for needed to be adapted to run on offline contests, on vulnerable contests in 4 languages, and also be guided by the teachers, and teachers with very low digital competences. ProFuturo works on Africa, on Latin America. We are with this project, this tool, in offline contests, almost offline contests. So in this process of search, we had our first find. It wasn't easy to find a provider that was interested in doing this adaptation to offline contests. And maybe the reason is that it's not attractive to EdTech companies because it's not the most profitable product to them. The cost benefit to take a online tool to offline tool, maybe it was not so attractive to them. So that's our first find. The second challenge, but we get one. We could choose one. The second challenge that I'd like to mention was the work that we had to do to adapt the original platform that is a platform for a Spanish company called Eating Learning to the ProFuturo's offline version without lose the original characteristics that from this platform that is based on adaptive learning on 3 levels: error processing, learning and memory curves, and intelligent content selection. We could not lose this on the offline version. We could not lose the possibility to the teacher to analyze and monitoring the learning process to the students that who is working with these teachers in this school, in these specific schools, where we create with a server, a online, a network, a local network, and we could not lose the gamified metacognition that is in this platform, where each student can become aware of his or her own learning process. It was very difficult to do this adaptation. For us, we decided to use as a guide the Common Core, the American Common Core, and all this adaptation and translation to 4 languages took us 18 months and a lot of inversion. So this is another find that we had. Is not easy in this case, in our case of this product, to adapt it to the offline context. How through this process we had the pandemic. So when
Mila, on the AI case, I wonder if you can just kind of move to kind of describing kind of how then the AI and the math tutoring has kind of been integrated into this.
The AI is the tool has inside the AI. So what we had to do is to not lose these characteristics. And now that we are launching the platform, they are being used in almost 1,000 of schools. They can do the work on the local servers, but we can't get the data. We can receive the data. So this is our principal challenge now. And why it's important to us to get the data, because what is happening now? These schools has the platform inside your own server. These schools are around the world. The teacher can help, can use, and can see what the students are working in. The local server, the local platform can use these characters that I said in the local version, but how we can receive the data and they can receive the data back. They are not getting the most news adaptation that the algorithm is learning, and we can see how things are going on the development of these students. So this is the challenge that we are facing now. And what it means that we have to do more development to make the data, this crossing data, easier and faster. Because if we don't do this, we don't have the possibility to learn from them, and they don't have the possibility to learn from what another students around the world are doing in this platform. So this is our principal challenge that we have.
So this is a major challenge in
moment.
almost every country we work in, is the reality of digital infrastructure, the lack of internet connectivity, the lack of local cloud services that are able to effectively provide education services, the language issue. And I think I would encourage everyone that maybe has experience with this to kind of maybe share some ideas and some solutions on what is the size of the data that's required? Where should it be housed? How frequently does the data need to be trained? What is the frequency in which data can be provided back to students for which use cases? So this offline challenge is enormous in every country. And I think this is a good opportunity to bring Jagadish, JB, who is the CTO at the XStep Foundation, to share a little bit about what India is doing with voice AI directed towards illiterate population and looking to expand this into 22 languages. JB, I wonder if you can introduce yourself and explain a little bit the project that you're working on and kind of what you see as the challenges and the hopes of the project. JB,
Sure. Thank you, Bob. First of all, India is getting into the semifinals of World Cup, and that excites me. Just the match is getting concluded, the semifinals against New Zealand, and that's a very, very exciting space to be. No matter what project I'm dealing with, this is a phenomenal space. We have not lost a match in this World Cup. That itself is a record. So what we're doing here, I mean, first of all, great discussion so far. Some of the projects I do want to come back to and connect up with you. We're kind of, while Bob talked about voice AI and applying it to multiple languages, I want to kind of lead into this project with another update of sorts with the project we're working on. We realized that XStep Foundation is an organization based out of India, Bangalore. And in the education space, we built an open source platform called Sunbird, which powers India's overall federal education platform. It powers that, right? In its repository, there are about 200,000 pieces of content, textbooks, lesson plans, teacher trainings. There are about 160 million teacher training completions on this platform. And there are billions of learning sessions based on the textbook. Now, one of the projects that we are working on right now is to leverage the power of LLM by training a retrieval augmented generation model, RAG model, to make access more intelligent, whether it is courses getting easier to access for teachers or specific contents within the courses becoming easily available after finishing the course. Now, let's say I finish a course, a teacher finishes a course on how to teach, let's say, trigonometry better for, let's say, an 8th grade student. And I want to revise it. I want to pick up a small section from that course. Now, the problem is that I have to go back and, look for that module and so on and so forth, right? But the RAG models today actually make it possible for us to pick up that specific section based on how you train the vectors, basically. So this is an area of work which is very exciting, given the scale of the adoption of the larger platform in India by the government of India and states, all states. Textbooks becoming I see some chat messages on textbooks. So this is one project, both for early education, primary, pre-primary, primary, and high school. Very big opportunity to deploy AI.
And please, JB, share links after this in the chat so that people can kind of explore this a bit more.
Yeah, surely. I'll share the link for the main platform, and in the days to come, maybe in the next month, same time, Government of India will launch the platform, right? The LLM, and we are now experimenting the last stages. There's some of the challenges of this I'll quickly touch upon before going to the other piece. The challenge has been the training time, and also the RAG cost of RAG, the vector cost, as well as the model cost, the cost of access.
Explain what RAG cost and vector cost mean very quickly for everyone.
Sure. So when you look at, basically LLMs are useful only when you want to provide a very, very niche closed space to operate in. Otherwise, it starts hallucinating, especially for capacity building, education-centric cases. You do not want any hallucination. In order to contain the hallucination, you have an idea called RAG. Retrieval augmented generation is the name, as it is called. What it does is very specifically contains the LLM to operate within the content you provide, very, very specifically. So it means that, for example, if you have a course and you want to search that course, all answers, no matter what the question is, has to be within that course. Then there's no room for hallucination because it's just coming from that course or a textbook or a lesson plan or a bunch of lesson plans. So the cost, so you need, in order to do this implementation, you got to implement vectors, and each one of them actually is two costs. Cost of development itself is not cheap, at least in Indian terms. It requires very high-end developers to do this. Data scientists to work on it, and data engineers and data scientists cost. Plus, every transaction, there is a cost of paying for ChatGPT 3.5. And 3.5 is very, very, very effective for this. We find that. Another interesting application of this that we have already, Government of India is going to launch, already made plans for it, is very interesting use case of providing extremely specific guidance to teachers, administrators on the policy documents. India launched the National Curriculum Framework and National Education Policy. Put together 3 documents or 2,500 pages, very detailed. The problem is that policymakers need to get very specific advice, right? What is the position of the policy on this topic? Now, imagine you locating that document and locating that particular section. But imagine having a LLM-powered bot telling you that, okay, in this page number, in this section, here is a summary that helps you answer it. It's been very, very, very beneficial for the community, and a lot of usage is seen. And so government will be launching that as a formal platform, especially for policy advice. Policy advice has been a very, very big hit, and it's hallucination-free, and with specific references. It also increases the trustworthiness of the answers very, very heavily, right? Now, this is the larger idea, one idea. The second idea pertains to, could we improve the fluency of readers, especially young readers, in mother tongue and English, leveraging AI, both deep learning as well as GenAI? So this is the question, right? So again, to make it very specific, how do we increase the reading fluency and not comprehension, reading fluency in mother tongue and English for young learners, leveraging AI? So this is a question becoming so specific because I find there is an opportunity to do so. Why so? The language recognition systems, when you reverse engineer them, can help point out knowledge gaps in the learner for some specific syllables. Okay, syllables. So in Indian context, again, I want to make it specific, right? One of the languages, the southernmost state next to the state I'm in, and in my state as well, generally about 250 syllable combinations you got to deal with to be able to first know what that word means. I mean, not the word reads like. You have to have a good recall of 250 syllables. Now, most likely, many of them will have a gap in that syllable knowledge itself. And as soon as they encounter a syllable that they don't know, it's like a stop. It stops the reading and breaks the fluency. And this is one of the reasons why young learners can't read very fluently. Now, the problem is that when even in the hands of a very caring teacher, even in the pre-primary and high school children, it becomes very difficult to locate who doesn't know what syllable, who needs help with what. I mean, in a class of 50, it becomes very difficult. And most of the time, as children age, they can't, it becomes a problem for them to show up and say, I don't know some syllables. That
So
makes
JB,
them feel.
have you tested this solution yet, or is
Yes.
this still in the conceptual phase?
No, we have put it to use in one state with 500.
What's the main learning? I mean, how do you deliver this in the local language and it teaches English, or is it? Give us just a very brief example, because we're kind of running against time, but a very brief example of kind of how this has been implemented.
Yeah. So the state has found it very useful as an idea to start with. So what they have done, they have actually implemented 6,000 schools equipped 6,000 schools with 20 computers with 2 headsets per computer with a splitter. So the way it gets implemented, and the pilot is going on in 500 schools. The idea is very simple. Children read preconceived statements on the screen. They just start reading. As they read, the AI engine knows what you're expected to read and starts understanding what you're reading and breaking it at a syllable level, probabilities. After 20, 40, 50, 60 sentences for every individual, you most likely you have developed a map of what they don't know and what they know. So the next stage after this is, since I know what you don't know and I know what you know, in order to improve the fluency, construct sentences that you with syllables that you know very well. I know that you know, with high probability, I know you know. Therefore, they start reading with confidence as compared to those with very difficult, as compared, it's very personalized sentences for you, for every one of them, right? And this is the loop that gives you, it's like, how to ride a cycle, right? You start riding and then you start mastering different techniques of riding a cycle instead of trying to get you all the techniques in one shot and then trying to cycle. So this is a simple idea to gain you from low fluency to high fluency in English, in mother tongue and English. So this is the larger idea. And it's getting implemented. It's actually works in 500 schools with children coming to lab every day.
When will you have an evaluation ready to share on this first pilot of 500? Yeah. That's the question everybody on the chat is waiting for.
No. I mean, to get to that evaluation stage, because I'm kind of, like I'm like an engineer, I'm tweaking it. There is a way to get this. I'm finding a lot of hope in this. Now, maybe in 2 to 3 months, the rig is ready to go into formal kind of evaluation. But it's a probabilistic system. Even if it makes a mistake, doesn't matter. But I know what you don't know with a higher probability than what I know what you know. Therefore, I can work around this, right? So that's the larger idea.
Now, this issue of, this is fascinating, JB, on this experience, but also the work that you'd mentioned before on the very precise, and this was something that we mentioned before, on kind of the niche areas to avoid hallucination and the cost of that, and kind of what is the process that you have gone through to determine kind of what are those niches, what is the process for developing these models, how much time does it take to train, how much data is required. So any information that you can kind of share in the chat would be fantastic. Again, the objective of these conversations, we can't go in depth on any of these, but it's just little nuggets to kind of whet the appetite so that hopefully others on the chat will follow up with you and we can develop this community further. As this area is exploding, I think the collective knowledge is going to be much greater than any one of us individually. At least I can speak for myself. So I really appreciate everything that has been shared today, all the information that's been put in the chat. And I want to pass over to my colleague Cris with the inevitable task of trying to make some sense of everything that was shared today. Cris, any final reflections?
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry, please go ahead. No, it's you. It's you.
No, Cris Cobo.
There's
I'm
way
sorry,
too many
Cris
Chris's
is
on the call.
confused.
No.
Cris, I'll give you
Sure.
a final word at the end.
Okay, fantastic. So, well, a lot has been said. I strongly recommend people to copy the links in the chat. Has been a fascinating discussion. So whatever I say is going to be 100% unfair, and 2 will be absolutely obsolete in 3 more weeks, right? So let's be sure that these things are part of a moving target. So I think a framing question has been, is this a solution searching for problems? I think we have enough problems in education that many of these trial and errors and things and knowledge that we're building could be of extreme relevance. One, I think equity has been addressed in several moments of the discussion. The opportunities to automate labor-intensive activities, building lesson plans, I think is incredibly promising, and the idea of going for solutions that can be online first, that can be using very creative ways of local service is fantastic. Also, all of that brings a lot of promising in terms of opportunities for the underserved communities. Second, I think there's I came several times the idea of language. Many languages are significantly underrepresented, so there's a lot of work to build here and build data sets of users who might not be today be considered. Is something that I hear there's a lot of discussions in the roadmap in that direction. Third, in terms of architecture, there's different philosophies and approaches. Data centralization in a small number of players, or decentralization, like the philosophy of blockchain, and very novel ideas of content interoperability. I think is fascinating. Now, number 4, I think we heard a lot about promising approaches for assessment for those things which have been systematically hard to monitor, but also the idea of using this assessment for learners to be more self-aware of what they're learning, what is their process. And now we heard a fantastic opportunity in bringing this to increase reading fluency. So I love all these approaches. And let me finish with what I would call for me the golden rule that I think is important not to underestimate. We can automate many of these things in education, but at least for now, to ensure quality, that requires a lot of extra hard work and intensive labor from expert communities, which is something that we really need to factor in these deployments. That can change in the future, but for the time being, one will be the evidence. I think that's something to address. Over to you, Bob.
Bravo, fantastic summary, Cris. Cris Purifoy, I give you 30 seconds for any wrap-up comments, and then I will say 10 seconds for a final word so that we make it on time. Cris.
No,
Cris
yeah,
P.
I've got nothing other than just to say thank you for everyone that attended and everyone that participated. This has been a really great conversation, and looking forward to the next one. So we'll be sending some follow-ups with recordings and such. But thanks all for contributing.
Thanks to both Chris's. Thanks to everybody who attended for your generosity of spirit in terms of kind of sharing your experiences, your questions. I hope, like any gathering, kind of the coffee hour and the offline was just as valuable as the sharing of information. I hope you've made some new connections, sparked some new ideas, and I hope that we can kind of keep this community moving forward. If any of you have any ideas on what you might want to discuss in a future iteration of this discussion, please share them. We'd love to kind of begin to kind of rotate the responsibility for sharing these. So again, we want to use this as a community for each of you to both learn from each other, make connections, as well as kind of deepen your own projects. So on behalf of the World Bank, thanks again, everybody. We will share kind of the translation as well as the chat with all of you, and we'll be in touch in the new year with the 12th iteration of this community. So thanks again to everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye. And a special thanks to Dean and team for putting this together. Bravo. Dean gives the little thumbs up. Okay.